Welcome to Pretty Lies and Alibis. Let's seek the truth and travel the long road to justice together. What you know, Alibiers? Welcome to another episode of Pretty Lies and Alibis. I'm Gigi. Good to have you here on this Saturday. This was supposed to go out yesterday, but guess what? Internet problems again. I'm here now. So we're going to rock this and get episode 2 out of the way. Just want to take a moment to acknowledge the fact that yesterday on June 9th was the 3-year anniversary of when they found JJ and Tylee's bodies on Chad Daybell's property. It's always a really heavy day. And I know it is for everybody who knew and loved those kids. But it's also the day that we launched the podcast. And we'd followed this case for months, me and Fruit Loop. A lot of you newer listeners, I had a co-host up until July of last year, and we've been best friends for over 30 years. But she is now working with domestic violence victims, housing them and getting them out of the cycles of abuse and giving them a place to stay where they feel safe. And I'm super proud of her. We're still working together. I'm hoping the podcast can help her. And then in return, they can help me understand domestic violence a little bit better with statistics and warning signs and things like that, because you can relay that stuff to listeners and one person may need to hear that to get the courage to seek help. So I'm excited to see where we go in the future with that. I'm planning a live at some point to celebrate 3 years. I never really like to celebrate it on the day they found the kids' bodies. It's just too heavy of a day for anything happy. But I would like to get some guests to come on and hang out. I don't like to sit here by myself. So I'll keep you posted. I'm not in a huge hurry. Tuesday at 7 p.m. Eastern, I will be on the STS podcast with Kay and Larry Woodcock. I'm looking forward to that. It's a great show. I always love going on. And so I will put that link out as soon as it's available. Sad news. A couple of days ago, Tammy Daybell's mother passed away. She had been sick for a while, and I don't think it was unexpected, but still tough nonetheless for the Douglas family, who have suffered just immeasurable losses over the last few years. I hope that they're doing okay. And I know all of us Alibiers are sending love and light and a lot of positive vibes to them through this difficult time. I'm glad that she did live to know that at least Lori was convicted of conspiracy for Tammy, because that's a little taste of justice that she got to take with her. And I say, you know, we'll pick it up from here. We'll stand guard. So some other news: Judge Boyce has ruled who can speak at Lori's sentencing, which is going to be July 31st next month. I'll be there for Law and Crime Network. He has ruled that Kay Woodcock, Colby Ryan, and Summer Shiflett will be allowed to give victim impact statements. Pawpaw Larry Woodcock will not. Sadly, he can come on here and go for 3 hours if he wants. Love you, Larry. I'm sorry that this is happening. Also, Lori's Uncle Rex and Tammy's Aunt Vicky will not be allowed to give victim impact statements. So we're going to jump in. I do plan next week to go through the state's response to Lori's motion for a new trial and get through that probably before we pick up Letitia Stalk. I think we do have one more episode after this on Shiny Happy People. I was a little off in my prediction that it would take one episode. It's four separate episodes, so it takes a minute. Real quick, want to thank everybody who donated. And music fact of the day: Live Aid, Queen, in my opinion, gave the greatest performance in rock and roll history ever. This was viewed by 1.9 billion people. It was broadcast July 13th, 1985. And there were 2 stages. One was in London, the other was in Philadelphia. This was to raise money for famine-stricken Ethiopians. It was amazing. I remember watching that live as it happened. And funny little fact, a sign at Wembley told the stars to check their egos at the door. Bob Geldof put that on, and he played Pink in the Pink Floyd The Wall movie. In fact, I'm watching that tonight with my kids. We're going to dive right into part 2 of Shiny Happy People. It starts out with audio of news clips talking about Josh molesting his sisters. Remember the last episode we talked about the trooper that Jim Bob took Josh to see, who was a friend of Jim Bob's? Well, get this, not surprising. The man, Joseph Hutchins, he's serving 56 years for the exact same thing that Josh Duggar is serving 12 years for. The reason his sentence is heavier, because he was convicted before that, got out, and reoffended. So it kind of fits now as to why he absolutely did nothing when Jim Bob brought Josh there to confess what he had done to his sisters and the babysitter. They go to Jill and Derek, and Jill called Derek crying when the news broke. They were engaged at the time. And Deanna, Jim Bob's sister, said she broke down crying when she heard. She wanted to be there for the girls, but it was all hush hush, and nobody told her the truth about what really happened. Jill said that in the days following the news being made public, that her dad and the producers would talk with urgency about how they were going to deal with this. And poor Jill, she said, you feel the burden and the weight falls on you to help because you are the only one who can. They play a clip from the Megyn Kelly interview with Jim Bob and Michelle. She asked what happens with Josh, and Jim Bob said that he was curious about girls, and then he went into his sister's rooms while they were asleep and touched them over their clothes. Jim Bob says the girls didn't even know, but then they cut to Jim Holt. Remember, Jim Holt is Jim Bob's best friend from when they were 12. Also, he's the one that just got the order of protection served on him for 10 years with his wife, Bobby. But Jim Holt says, I don't remember that's the way it happened. And he said Jim Bob was not being honest in that interview. Megyn Kelly asked Jim Bob if they worried the treatment didn't help, especially since they had so many small children in the house. And Jim Bob said that when Josh came back, he was a changed person. They cut back to Jill, and she said even after the interview with Megyn Kelly, her and Jessa went on the Megyn Kelly show and did an interview. It was the first interview after the scandal broke. So you had two of the victims on TV for the first time. She still felt the weight of it all on them to do damage control and to try to polish up this image, because it seems like Jim Bob really was just hyper focused on getting that show back on the air. I had told you guys about a YouTuber named Jennifer. The name of her YouTube channel is Fundy Fridays, and it is great. I really recommend you guys go watch her. She's awesome. I've binged several episodes of her, but she goes into the leak with the Ashley Madison website where Josh was exposed as a client, and he paid to have an affair. He paid money out of his pocket to hook up. They showed Jim Bob and Michelle giving a talk in front of a crowd. And Jim Bob says, I guess you've read about it or seen it on TV. We've been through a lot of trials. Now, Jim Bob's sister, Deanna, said that he could have done things much differently. And if Jim Bob had woken up and realized that Josh needed help, maybe we wouldn't be here. Michelle is speaking to a crowd and said, I don't think I need to talk to Josh. I'm going to talk to our Heavenly Father. It's kind of weird because I understand prayer if you pray. This is kind of, I think, in some ways, what can be dangerous about these set of beliefs, which is there are some things you just can't pray away. There are things that need earthly help and worldly help. And as we know, the IBLP is very much against bringing anything of the world into their lives, their homes, their business, anything. But it is kind of scary to think that we know that they did nothing legally to hold Josh accountable. We know that there was one counseling session with the parents in the room. They couldn't even remember the counselor's name as far as getting the girls help. So I think it's just a little wishful thinking that you can just not even talk to your son about his severe issues and just pray about it and just drop it there, because that seems to me like you're kind of just passing, you can't just kick the can to Jesus every time. Sometimes you got to be proactive and do things here on earth. Cousin Amy said people finally started waking up and wondering what's really going on. We're introduced to Lindsay Williams. She is an ex-IBLP, and she's explaining how a friend convinced her to participate in this documentary, saying that she had manifested this sacred space years ago when Lindsay said this needed to stop and people need to know what really happened. She said when she first saw the Duggars on TV, it weirded her out, and she said she didn't need to watch the show because she lived it. She was 8 when her family began going to the IBLP seminars to hear Bill Gothard talk. She had been in public school but was taken out, and she said the idea of sitting in the basement with her 2 brothers with milk cartons and some plywood for desks, she wondered what this honky-tonk situation going on here was. Floyd and Tara are back on here, and Floyd had seen Jim Bob and Michelle speak at IBLP conferences before their show even began. We get introduced to Chad Harris, who's an ex-IBLP, and says they weren't allowed to watch any kind of TV, but if they did have a TV, it would be set to VCR with IBLP material or things that were approved by the IBLP for them to watch. He said it was really boring. And he explains that he lived in a really small town in Alabama, and your job options were either in the coal mine or a steel mill. He said his dad had an opportunity to become a pastor in the movement, and he took it. Then we are introduced to Tia. She became involved in IBLP as a new mom, and she said she was a young wife looking for someone to teach her. She says she's sure that Jim, Bob, and Michelle have mentors too, somebody that just shows you every aspect of what you should be doing. She said the market for Gothard was obviously church people, and they'd leave the seminar, the attendees, and take the message Bill gave them to their own churches and try to push the program and influence the program in their home churches. And she said this worked in spreading the movement, especially in Southern Baptist churches. Heather Heath is introduced and explains she was homeschooled from the first day of school. Her mom's childhood was very traumatic from abuse. And so her mother started going to the Bill Gothard basic seminars when they first started. She said IBLP offered her mom's just a promise of peace and a safe place. She said, when you think of cults, you think of compounds and things like that. Bill Gothard, there was no specific church. He would control his followers with his teachings. Chad Harris said that Bill Gothard's main point was authority and the umbrella of authority. Christ, the husband, the wife, the children. It's the umbrella is big at the top, and as you go down, it gets smaller and smaller and smaller. Tia talks about the chain of command. Kids obey their parents. The parents obey the pastor. The wife obeys the husband. If you obey and stay under the umbrella of authority, nothing bad can happen to you. It's interesting because I remember way back when Jim Bob lost the Senate race. This is actually, I think, before the show went on air. He said there was sin in the camp. And I think the insinuation is that he was blaming sin in the household for why he didn't win. Ironically, this is around the same time that Jim Bob and Michelle became aware of the molestation with Josh and his sisters and the babysitter. Josh Pease said on the outside, authority looks good. There's a calmness. And then Gothard is seen giving a talk to a stadium and says, we can present to your sons and daughters the whole world on a golden platter. Josh Pease said that Gothard was selling a simpler time. He talks about the Brown versus the Board of Education and the desegregations of school in the U.S. White evangelical Christians began to take their kids out of school and homeschool, which really kind of kicked off the homeschool movement. Josh P. says Gothard was so effective because he realized that he could fit this homeschool movement in with the seminars, and out of that, ATI was born in 1984. Jill talks about the ATI conferences. They go once a year, and she said parents homeschooled because they thought public school would brainwash their kids. They show an older clip of Josh. He was 17 at the time, and he was talking to somebody interviewing him about ATI. And he says the purpose is to train young men and women to be leaders of the next century. He said young people need a role model. They show Bill Gothard, and he said 20 years ago, 102 families gathered in the North Woods and began ATI. These people who wrote 3,000 pages of the wisdom booklets stand on the stage with him. So let's talk about these wisdom booklets, y'all. They were the foundation of homeschooling in the IBLP education. It taught you to see life from God's perspective, and pretty much most of these lessons seem to be derived from scripture. There were 54 of these wisdom booklets. Each wisdom booklet had categories, and you would focus on one for every week. They show Michelle, a clip of her telling her kids to get out their wisdom booklets. The wisdom booklets were the foundation of the homeschooling education for IBLP kids, or ATI kids. It taught, he really likes his acronyms, doesn't he? It taught you to see life from God's perspective. There were 54 of those wisdom booklets, and each booklet had categories. So they would focus on one category each week. They show a clip of Michelle telling her kids to get out their wisdom booklets. They talked to Floyd, and he said he feels very sorry for anyone whose education were solely those wisdom booklets because it was not an education. Jim Bob said they learned of homeschooling at a conference and met with families who homeschooled. They noticed how mature the kids were, and they wanted those character qualities in their own kids. Jill said they would memorize their definitions, and on screen, I paused it. The word obedience is defined as the freedom to be creative under the protection of divinely appointed authority. Chad said the whole curriculum is based on the Sermon on the Mount. The Sermon on the Mount is a collection of sayings that were spoken by Jesus of Nazareth, and they're found in the Gospel of Matthew. It emphasizes Jesus' Christ's moral teachings. Chad said they would teach them everything they needed to know academically from the passages themselves. Bill Gothard pretty much sold ATI as having the equivalent of a high school diploma and a pre-med and a pre-law degree. And they show the law section, and underneath is a visual. It's God's law. They show the Duggars at the Creation Museum. They talk about evolution is unscientific to them. And Jill Duggar says you can see how the earth was formed with the flood. She said science backs up what scripture says. In the booklet, it says fossils did not form over millions of years. They were formed simultaneously in the Great Flood. Hands are composed of non-living atoms, y'all, in case you didn't know. Chad said a female friend of his who was in ATI said she never went past fractions in math because her dad said she only needed that much math because you use fractions in baking and that's good enough. Lindsay said that the more seminars they went to, the more freedom they lost over time. It influenced everything, what she could wear, what she could watch, listen to. The booklets had drawings of outfits. And what the kids will do is they will circle what is inappropriate about that outfit. Gothard is shown talking to a packed arena. And he said, when a young person listens to a rock song, even Christian rock, it gives Satan a little square of your soul. I don't even want to know how many squares in my soul Satan has because it's going to be a lot. Your girl rocks all day. The wisdom booklets say that the beat in today's music was traced to satanic rituals in the West African jungle. You can't make this up. The drum beat was used by tribe members to open up people to demonic control. Brooke Arnold, she's funny. She cracks me up. She said Gothard was kind of like the Wizard of Oz head looming over the audience saying that the rock beat is evil. And Brooke let us know she threw out all of her evil Amy Grant CDs. I remember people got mad that were really religious when she made that crossover. Then Heather makes a game of life joke. I remember the life game. You had the little pegs that were like your kids in a little plastic car. She said there's not enough seats for the kids. But the Institute did have its own board games. Commands of Christ is one of the board games. And she said it was super fun and traumatic. It has things like the venomous pit of bitterness, the torture pit of temporal values, miry pit of moral impurity, the temptation to be bitter, temptation to lust, temptation to worry. It says, quote, a victory card or go to the miry pit. Winnie the Pooh was banned in some houses because some people felt Eeyore glorified depression. And Barbie, they considered her nothing more than a prostitute. Bill Gothard said the creator of the Cabbage Patch doll was a warlock. Derek said he asked Jill about this and never understood it. Jill said she didn't either because they weren't allowed to have one of those dolls. Gothard said when the dolls came off the factory line, the creator would curse the doll with a demon. I had an astronaut Cabbage Patch doll, by the way. I think my mom still has it. Our next partner is Athletic Greens. I take AG1 by Athletic Greens literally every day, and I gave it a try because I wanted better gut health, more energy, immune system support, and I hate taking pills and vitamins. I wanted a supplement that was easy. And I've always struggled with what to buy. I ended up taking 8 different supplements every morning at one point, and it was just too much. AG1 is super easy. It's 1 scoop of powder mixed with water once a day. That's it. AG1 has become part of my morning routine, and get this, it's packed with 75 different vitamins and minerals. On top of boosting my gut health and having more energy, my hair, skin, and my nails all look healthier. I also like the immune system support it provides since I'm on crowded planes and airports and courtrooms with a lot of people on a regular basis. If you're looking for an easier way to take supplements, Athletic Greens is giving you a free 1-year supply of vitamin D and 5 free travel packs, which are super handy when you're traveling with your first purchase. Go to athleticgreens.com/whattheworld. That's athleticgreens.com/whattheworld. Check it out. Tara talks about the fear that she would feel after these conferences as a kid. And if a tag of a toy had something about magic or anything like that, she would think she was bringing evil into the home or devil worshiping into the home. Then they show a really staged video of Michelle with the girls. They're ready for bed and she finishes reading a book to them and in a very pleasant tone. She says, okay, girls, let's go to bed. Then she pops her head back in. It's perfectly framed. You know, they set the shot up. And she says, good night, girls. I love you. So cousin Amy says that Michelle likes to present herself as meek and mild. Tia says the voice is intentional and it's taught. They were told to speak that way. She said, Michelle used to be a cheerleader. She can yell. She just doesn't. They show a clip of Michelle tucking a kid into bed, and she reminds the kid, the first time I say it, what is it? You obey it. It shows the Duggar girls shopping at a bridal dress store. Tia says they want sweet, innocent girls and not women. They also talk about the conservative dress code and big, bulky dresses with big pilgrim collars, as cousin Amy says. Jill said they dress that way to keep the focus on their face. They show a book with hairstyles crossed out, and Chad said for women, your hair had to be framed on your face a certain way. Lindsay said one time Bill Gothard took her aside and said he was frustrated. He told her hair wasn't curly enough, and she said after that, she would curl her hair ad nauseum. They cut to a clip of Jill getting a perm put in. She said her dad likes long hair, so they've kept their hair long. There's a clip from a seminar shown revealing reflections by Kay Hill. She asked, why is clothing such an area of contention? And she said the problem is that men have a problem with their eyes, so avoid giving them an eye trap. The shorter the skirt, the more vicious the trap. In the wisdom booklets, they have the drawings of the women. One of them has like lace from the mid chest up. They would circle that. That's inappropriate. There would be a mid-length skirt with a slit kind of halfway up the calf. That would be circled as inappropriate as well. They show a clip of Joy Duggar covering the TV to shield the boys from seeing something revealing. And Janice said if they were out in public and saw a woman who was not dressed appropriately, they would yell the word Nike, and that would be the cue for the boys to put their head down and not look. They show a passage, those who fall to her whoredom are stripped of resources and vibrancy of life. We're introduced to Eve, and she explains the IBLP way of thinking is so if your pastor is molesting you, it's because he's attracted to the young woman you're becoming, and it's your fault for seducing him. They showed rules saying to have older boys changing a baby girl's diaper. The reasoning is if he knows what female anatomy looks like, he will be tempted to touch. And she said the taboo of it all actually leads to hypersexuality. And I completely agree with that. When you make anything off limits to a young person, you're only piquing their curiosity, and it makes it all that more alluring and mysterious. And I have to find out. Not an excuse for molesting your sisters and a babysitter. I'm just saying, as a whole, be honest with your kids in an age appropriate way. It's the world we live in. They have to understand if something is not right. Because one thing too that I've seen a couple of times watching a couple of these cult documentaries, I was watching the Warren Jeffs one last night. And some of these girls, when they were married to one of these guys, one of the Warrens, they did not even know what intercourse was. And so they had no clue. And I would imagine a lot of that might be the same in IBLP. So you have to educate your kids on what's inappropriate and what's private. But it seems like it's just kind of an off-limits subject for the most part. They teach kids the STDs are acquired through immorality. They show Gothard at a seminar saying whoever introduced pornography to the U.S. has done more damage than 100 Hitlers. They show Jim Bob saying a lot of newspaper inserts also contain pornography. Mine is always like a hardware store and like some coupons for Carl Jr.'s. I don't know what kind of inserts they were getting, but I ain't never seen none of those. Michelle is on stage with Jill and Jessa saying that romance novels, you guessed it, they're pornography. Jim Bob and Michelle are on the stage, and he says they talked to their kids at one point and said there's a lot of things in the home, DVDs, books, all kinds of stuff that Jim Bob did not feel were pleasing to the Lord. So he asked for the kids to help gather things to have a big bonfire, and they did. Cousin Amy said they burned everything Disney and anything that was considered worldly. Chad said he had heard of Gothard cleansing people's houses for them. He would go from room to room and pray out any demonic influence to be cleansed by the power of Jesus. The Duggars are on stage with their violins singing in unison, the little kids now, why should I not be put in hell to suffer for all time? Laura Smith is introduced, and she said, this had you constantly on edge, thinking every little thing you did might be the reason you go to hell. She said hell was not an abstract concept for them, and she would dream of being burned alive as she thought of things like, I don't like my brother today. Eve said, if you're constantly searching yourself for ways to stay out of hell, you don't have time to question the system itself. Chad says in IBLP, you're taught you have a spiritual gift and you have to determine what yours was. They show several, but they really focus on two. Tia says that prophets, which is one, could be as big a jerks as they wanted, and the mercies just take it. So, wonder who the prophets are? You guessed it, the men. Mercies typically are women. Mercies have the ability to share the burden of others. And Jill says that she was given the spiritual gift or decided her spiritual gift was a mercy. And also, the Duggars practice parentification. And that's obviously where kids take on parent roles in the household. Gothard said the older ones must be trained because the older ones take care of the younger ones. Jill says in their house, the older siblings would care for the younger ones. And we saw that many a times if you watched any of these shows. The ages that she had under her care ranged from 6 to 16, and they had buddy pairs and they also had teams. Eve said that parenting her siblings was one of her biggest traumas, and she's still working through the trauma. She would attend the births with her mom, and she would do everything for the new baby, including night feedings, and stayed exhausted. They cut to Michelle Duggar, and she explains that the new baby is her buddy until it's weaned. Then the baby is passed down to the other buddy, which is an older sister whose ever turn it is to be a buddy. Jennifer says that kids as young as 11 are raising their siblings. And Tia said nobody would see if the 11-year-old had needs of their own. And I have an 11-year-old. I still have to do things for her. She's a child. But to think that she would be 100% responsible for an infant during overnight hours and things like that with no sleep, and I can't imagine. And I can see where that would be very traumatic for anybody having to do that at 11. Probably younger. It shows clips of the Duggar girls doing everything from teaching toddlers how to brush their teeth to play the violin. Laura said when she saw the Duggar kids on TV acting so calm, her heart broke for them because she knew what it took to get them to act that way. She said she saw broken spirits. They cut to a clip of Bill Ligon asking the audience for a child to borrow to demonstrate how to properly spank your child and bless him at the same time. This really made my skin crawl. He said, I want to tell you. So he's got a little boy on stage who he doesn't know. Daddy's not pleased with the way you acted today, and you know it's wrong, right? So I'm going to spank you. Lean over right now. The boy lays across this stranger's lap, and he is talking to the audience as he pats this boy's bottom in a very steady pace. He's not spanking him, he's demonstrating. But as he's doing the fake spanking, the man says, you're a fine boy. You're going to grow up to be an outstanding man. God's hand is on your life, son. Once he finishes the demonstration, he asks the little boy if he understands, and he says yes. And he says, give me a hug, son. So the boy leans in and gives like a one-sided hug, a very awkward for him hug. Like, I don't know you all, and you just had me laid across your lap, and now you want me to hug you. The man says, I don't think you put yourself in that hug, son. And he lays him back across his lap and demonstrates spanking him again. Now, the audience goes wild with laughter because it's so funny. Not. Then after that, he says, let's see if we can get a good hug out of this. And he hugs him again. Chad said his mom was his abuser. She would scream, threaten, and beat them relentlessly. In one incident, she beat him for an hour in the church bathroom, saying that she needed to break his will. A family friend walked in and said, I was saying the whole time, please stop hurting that sweet boy. His mom said, yes, but I have to break his will. He said this became a funny family story to everybody except him, obviously. They show Michelle at a seminar saying, I'm not going to let you disobey. What you need to do is honor. And then they showed Josie, which was the last child born to the Duggars. It was number 19. Number 20 didn't have a heartbeat. Josie was a preemie. She had some struggles in life, but they're talking about she's around 2.5, saying instant obedience to initial prompting of God's Spirit. This clip creeped me out so bad. There is a woman on stage and she's talking at a conference, and she's talking about how their 8th born, their number 8 child, just resisted every bit of training that she tried to give him. When he was 14 months old, she didn't know what to do with him. He was really shaming his mother. And she kind of laughs and said, I would spank that child all day long. Then we get to these two, Michael and Debbie Pearl, who wrote a book to train up a child. And it was endorsed by Gothard. And it was kind of the go-to book on how to spank your children. It promotes beating kids with branches and belts, For a child under 1 year of age, a willowy branch or a 1-foot ruler was recommended. For older children, a larger branch or a belt. Now, I took the liberty of finding a little preview of this nastiness. And in the first chapter, it says training is the conditioning of the child's mind before the crisis arises. It is preparation for future, instant, unquestioning obedience. If you have to sit on him to spank him, then do not hesitate and hold him there until he is surrendered. Defeat him totally. The author, Debbie Pearl, is speaking on the documentary, saying that if a child is going to have authority, you have to let the man be the authority. Michael Pearl is speaking and says to punish him with the rod severely. He demonstrates on a doll that has a mad face drawn on it, kind of like Sharpie is what it looked like to me. He said if he screams too hard with the first 5 and gets hysterical, wait. A little psychological terror is sometimes more effective than the pain. Then they cut to a clip of this Michael Pearl on Anderson Cooper, where he said the techniques for training animals and humans are the same. This people disgust me, man. I'm telling you. Tia explains his goal is to show parents how to spank and not get in trouble with the police in how you spank and what you use to spank. She said she's seen PVC pipe, long glue sticks, and things like that to beat kids with. Bill Gothard said it's the rod of reproof. He said the benefit is when the child sees a neutral object that has become something for punishment come out, it becomes like a policeman. They cut over to Amy Duggar, and she has tears flowing down her face, and she's asked if she ever saw any of the kids being punished with rods. She said they called it encouragement. Jim Bob and Michelle would say, you need to come in here and we need to give you some encouragement. And she said it was never in an angry tone. It was in that sweet Michelle tone. Then they go into blanket training, y'all. My blood pressure rose up during this whole documentary, but this is really enraging. You put an infant on a blanket and then you put a toy just off the blanket out of their reach. When the child goes for the toy, you hit them. This is to break the rebellious spirit they're born with. And Michelle Duggar wrote about blanket training in her book. She said, I would focus on blanket training, calling out, okay, boys, it's time for blanket training. Oh, isn't this fun? Come pick a toy so we can have blanket time. Obey mama. Sit really still and look at me with a big old smile. Want to see that smile? No wiggles. Be still. They'd do this sometimes 2 to 4 times a day, sometimes only once a day, but it was common practice in the Duggar household. The boys would spread their own blankets out and eagerly choose a special toy to play with. And they show a clip of her talking in that sweet voice. Children are taught in the IBLP not to resist when being spanked because they're told it's for their own good. They're taught their body belongs to the church and authorities that be. Eve said this is grooming kids to be ready for more predators as young adults and even as adults. And Joel Pease said Gothard franchised physical, emotional, and psychological abuse. Gothard is heard saying the only way to be free is to learn the wishes of your authority. Floyd said his dad loved the patriarchal angle of the IBLP and the control and protection it gave him was valuable, which explains why when Floyd was 12, his father was convicted of sexually assaulting a minor. So that's why I enjoyed the protection of this group. He said his mother was supported by IBLP to stay with the man and also to allow him back in the home. Floyd said that was a very traumatic time for him. I can imagine. I can't imagine, actually. I can't imagine. Then we see an old clip of Anna Duggar, Josh Duggar's wife. They met at an ATI conference in 2006, and her family had known about the Duggars for many years. Not surprising. They were big into the IBLP even before the show took off. But now we get into courtship. They promote it as a way to guarantee sexual purity. It puts the parents as the head of every relationship. The man approaches the woman's parents, probably the husband or the dad, to ask permission to court. And Chad said from that point forward, it's typically handled like an arranged marriage. They say that when a man says he wants you and he's God's man for you, if you don't like him, you just kind of have to adjust your feelings and thoughts around that and just kind of surrender to the fact that this is the man God brought in your life. A producer asked Josh and Anna from way back if they've Googled how to kiss, because remember, they don't kiss until marriage. And Anna looks shy and says no. And then she kind of pops up her head and says, wait, do they have that on there? They showed Jim Bob talk to Josh, and he literally said, it's time for the birds and the bees talk. Now, Josh was about ready to get married, I believe, days before he got married. So, what better time to have the birds and the bees talk? Jim Bob gives Josh a CD and a book detailing how you do things, essentially. They show clips from Josh and Anna's wedding and say that on that day, Josh then becomes the authority over Anna after her father gives her to Josh. They show a few little clips from the wedding itself. When asked if they trusted God in regards to the size of their family, they both say, we do. Remember when Josh was convicted, they had 7 kids. So they were well on their way. When asked on Fox News why launch a reality show with such a big secret, Jim Bob said they talked to more families and had heard similar things happening in other families. It's not an excuse. Jill said after the scandal hit, they would get chased by paparazzi and they would have family meetings. And Jim Bob's PR guy would be there. His name is Chad Gallagher. And he also worked with Mike Huckabee. He's the one who set up the Megyn Kelly interview with Jessa and Jill. The goal ultimately for Jim Bob was to get this show back on the air with TLC. So they show the interview with Jill and Jessa on Megyn Kelly. And Jill says, as victims, we have to come out and speak. It was their choice. Nobody asked them to. And she said, in hindsight, she wouldn't have done the interview. They show the interview with Jill and Jessa on Megyn Kelly. And Jill said that as victims, we have to come out and speak. She said it was their choice. Nobody asked them to. Then they cut back to present day Jill. She felt it was her place to bear the burden and the weight. She starts to cry and says, even though you offered to do it, you still feel obligated to help. The molestation happened when Jill was 12, and Jessa said that she wanted to speak in Josh's defense to those calling him a child molester. She said that's really overboard and it's a lie. Jill said it was mild compared to what happened to some. It's so sad to see them minimizing in that interview, trying to justify why it happened or why it wasn't as bad. Those are very trained things. It seemed, I know cousin Amy said it seemed scripted to her. Jill said that she's sad because this is her older brother and she loves him a lot, but she made the choice to forgive him. She said they didn't know anything about it until they were told by their parents that the molestation had occurred. Derek chimes in and said he would not call the interview voluntary. He said that they were called to do the equivalent of a suicide mission. You're going to destroy yourself and you need to take the fall to carry the show forward because the show cannot fail. He said if that meant collateral damage, then that's what it meant. Amy said that Jill has strength and tenacity. She said she's not one to stay quiet. And in fact, cousin Amy said one night when Josh was trying to touch Jill, she hit him. Good for you, girl. They show Mike Huckabee in a meeting being asked about him defending the Duggars when the scandal came out. And he gets really ticked off and tells the woman she has no idea what she's talking about and says, you don't know that family. I do. As we know, TLC ended up canceling the show, and Jill said the interview wasn't enough and didn't save everything. And that broke my heart. This is present day Jill talking that even today, she still feels that bearing the weight of that burden and going out and making excuses wasn't enough. It was never your fight, girl. It was not your responsibility. And I can't imagine feeling like you have to go on air, coming to terms with this being public knowledge, to sit down and have to detail stuff. These girls were put in terrible situations. Jim Bob was trying to get the show back on, and TLC said they could not focus on him and Michelle or any of the kids in the home because that was too close to ground zero. They did add a couple of spinoffs with the girls with Jill and Jessa. Jill did not want to, but she said she never said she didn't want to. It was the umbrella of protection that was still ingrained in her mind. She thought by saying no, she would be disobeying her parents, and she was worried something bad would happen to her. So you look, even after this scandal has come out and they want to do this reality show, it's still, as a grown woman, those teachings of this umbrella of authority and that fear tactic of if you don't obey your parents or do this or do that, Satan's going to attack you. And it's not saying you shouldn't obey your parents, but it's still just that fear ingrained in their brains from a very, very young age that goes over into adulthood. She says the IBLP draws in people like Jim Bob who want to control, and it fosters this cult-like environment. So that was pretty much the end of episode 2. I know in episode 3, they get into some shenanigans that Jim Bob did, such as having these older adult kids sign contracts. Hey, I need you to sign something. Essentially, they're signing their life away to Jim Bob, and these shows really wouldn't be theirs. So it's still just a really nasty story. I'm going to bring it to you, and I'm hoping to maybe get one more episode in if I can fit it. I don't want to be repetitive. All very disturbing stuff. I mean, this is so disturbing. It's not even funny. And I've had a lot of people who are out of IBLP email me or inbox me and say, this is exactly what I grew up with. I've had a few that are still current members, of course, who say they got it wrong. This is not how it goes. But this is a stretch for me because if there's two things I don't talk about with anybody, politics or religion. So I'm trying to tread carefully here. I don't want to offend anybody, but at the same time, this is such a wide net of victims. And it's amazing that anybody would try to get in my inbox and defend any of this stuff because people have defended these kid beatings to me in inboxes. So I'm just going to tell you, thanks for reaching out. Appreciate your input. Anyways, all right, guys, I'm out of here. Hope you have a good rest of your weekend. We'll see you Monday.